Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Wordfence Live. You're using WordPress because it's a great platform for organized, well-structured content, creating compelling stories with media beyond the written word, whether audio, photography, or video, can do a lot to complement your content. Today, we're going to share what has worked for us here at Wordfence and demonstrate the tools that we've used to create compelling video and audio content so that you can gain a competitive advantage with your own audio and visual content strategy. Stay tuned. We'll be right back to get started. Thank you for joining us on this edition of Wordfence Live. My name is Scott Miller. I'm a customer support engineer here at Wordfence. In a few moments, I will be joined by the Defiant CEO, Mark Monder, the Director of Marketing, Kathy Zant, and a longtime viewer but first-time guest, Director of Photography, Sean Corbett, will be joining us for the first time today. Let us know where you're at. I'm streaming live from just south of the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. It's getting really, really nice here. I'm loving the weather. This week, as I said, we're going to give you a peek behind the scenes of content marketing initiatives here at Wordfence. And content comes in many forms: the written word, audio, visual, film, and written content has been a big part of the web, but audio and especially video are becoming even bigger. And according to Social Media Week, 88% of marketers are committed to devoting more dollars to video campaigns in the future, and because video works. According to Social Media Week, video viewers claim to retain 95% of a message when obtained via video. So if you're using video and audio in your content marketing, then you're ahead of the game. And if you're not yet using audio and video, then we're here today to share what we've learned in our journey here. Today is also the 1-year anniversary of the start of Wordfence Live, so thanks for joining us and thanks for sticking with us here. We've had a lot of fun. We started out as Wordfence Office Hours about a year ago, and a few months in, we changed to Wordfence Live. So if you were here for Office Hours, you've been here for a while. We're already at 2 years on Think Like a Hacker, our podcast, and it's gone through a number of iterations, both audio and video as well, and we will cover that today. Remember to hit the like button below the video here, as well as the subscribe and bell buttons, and you'll be notified when we go live. We've been going live every Tuesday at noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific. Let's bring in our guests. We got Defiant CEO Mark Monder, Director of Marketing Kathy Zant, and Director of Photography Sean Corbett. Mark, how's it going over there?
It's good. I am in heaven right now. I'm surrounded by gear. Yeah.
So, got a little bit of everything.
Yeah. You have no idea what it looks like next to me, but we're going to be exploring some of that stuff today, and it's going to be super fun. I'm really excited.
Very,
Great.
very cool. Kathy, how you doing?
Doing really well. Glad to be here. Happy 1-year anniversary.
Yes. It's been a year. It's felt like, 3 or 4 with everything going on the past year. But,
in a good way or a bad way?
Well, been loving doing the stream, but, kind of been stuck in the house, it feels like, for
right.
a good portion of that year. Sean, thanks for joining us. How's it going over there?
Happy to be here. Yeah, I got to set up all of this gear for today, so I'm very happy right now.
Yeah, so just to throw something out before we start, Sean, thank you so much. Firstly, for setting everything up right before you were going to go live and actually be on the show yourself. And I hope you've taken a moment to just calm your nerves. And just so that everyone knows, Sean is actually producing the show in real time on StreamYard as we're doing this. And we might talk a little bit about that. But if he seems distracted or anything like that, that's what's actually going on. Is he's the one that's making the little text go on the bottom of the screen there, and various other things happen and changing shots while he's also participating in the show. So thanks.
Yeah, so Sean's the one that puts up our cute pictures of cats and dogs and swag that we get. So thank you there. Before we get going, we got a lot of content to cover. We got our swag question here, so keep an eye out in the chat for the link you're going to get in just a second. The swag question is, what is open? The community code. So submit your answer there when you see the form. Again, the swag question is, what is open? the community code. You've heard us talk about it here before if you've been around for a while. So go ahead and click the link there, and we'll be sending out swag to some of the correct answers there. Now, Kathy, we have a lot to cover today. Do you want to kick us off? What is content marketing, and why is it so important? Why are we discussing this today?
Sure. Well, content marketing, for those of us who are using WordPress, obviously content, we realize that content is incredibly important. Content is king. Content is what the web is about. Content is what our customers are looking for. They're looking for answers to problems. They're looking for instructional material. They're looking to learn. They're looking for support materials. All of that content, including entertainment and our bad jokes sometimes, it's all a part of connecting with our customers, because your brand is supported by your product or your service, but it's also supported by the people behind the brand. I mean, that's part of the reason why we've been doing Wordfence Live, is so you can meet some of the people at Wordfence and get to know what we do and how the product works, and how all of this content helps create connections between our company and you, the customer, you, the viewer, and that content becomes supportive of our brand. News and current events that are in your niche. So we have Think Like a Hacker, our podcast, and we talk about news in the security space as it's appropriate for WordPress users. All of that content creates connections, and it's also favored by our big brother, our big friend Google. The search engines love
I think
good
Big Brother's
content.
okay. You can say Big Brother.
Well, I mean, a lot of what creates those connections, Mark, is Google, right? People finding the information. They go to search engines to try to find that content that's going to serve an immediate need. And I saw we saw a study recently that the number 2 search engine, one of your favorites, Mark, YouTube.
Oh yeah, I thought you were going to say Bing for a second. I was like, what?
People are looking for answers on YouTube because, like Scott said in the intro, 95% of viewers stated that they retain information better when they learn via video.
Right. Yeah. So the way I like to think about this is it's kind of like as a value chain. I've been doing SEO since the early 2000s, and it was really helpful when I started thinking about the problem that Google's trying to solve, which is that they have customers that are looking for certain things, and for Google to be competitive, they need to provide better answers to those customers' search queries than the next search engine. And so that's the problem that they're trying to solve. And so when you're thinking about creating content, you really want to think about the problem that Google's trying to solve. So think about what their customers will be looking for, and the kind of content that would best suit Google's goal of providing an amazing answer to that question that the customer is asking, which is really what a search query is. And I think you can apply the same logic to YouTube, which, as Kathy was pointing out, is also just another search engine.
Yeah, Forbes said that YouTube isn't just a website; it is a search engine, and they have 3 billion searches per month. So people are looking for the content that solves immediate problems. And that problem might be boredom, just like entertain me. Take me away, Calgon, of YouTube.
Yeah, but I think, and this is what we were chatting about a few weeks ago, Kathy, and I think you alluded to it earlier on in this conversation, that YouTube's main purpose these days seems to be educational. I mean, think about it. So yourself, I'm talking to the audience member, as well as everyone that goes to YouTube to figure out how to do things. My dad uses it for carpentry. I've used it to overhaul a outboard engine's carburetor, along with metalworking. Sean, I mean, we've been doing welding on the van that's behind me over here, and we actually have a welder here at Defiant, and someone who knows how to use it. But you get stuck on something, or you want to learn a technique or whatever, you go to YouTube to do it. And so I think developing that kind of content for YouTube has become really powerful, both for the audience and for the publisher, for the content creator.
Definitely. and it's just going to grow. And it's not just, YouTube obviously gives you so many tools in order to be successful as a content creator, whether it's, tagging videos, searching for other competitive videos that might be in your niche, what your competition is doing. They want you to be successful as a content creator because it makes their platform successful.
Right.
So
again, thinking about their goals, right?
Exactly. And so, this algorithm of YouTube becomes incredibly important. But in order to do that, you have to have solid content. And production is an incredibly important part of that as well. I mean, I've looked at some videos that I just can't, the audio's terrible, and I have to go find a different video. And it might not be the first one that's going to have the best content, but because the audio is bad and I can't hear the person who's teaching whatever I need to solve, I'm going to look for something better. So I think a lot of what we're going to talk about today, Mark, is, that production quality, and that's something that you've always really adhered to in terms of elevating the production quality.
I get nervous when you say that because we're actually doing a live broadcast on YouTube right now. It's like what's our production quality like? As we're telling people, you need to focus on your production quality. So, yeah, I think. I think it's actually an interesting conversation starter, right? Because if you look at my shot, I've got a lot more gear here. I've got a lot more space. I happen to have Sean, who is actually in the next room, who set all of this up. I have a massive diffusion surface over there. I have a really good quality camera over there. Sean has created lighting effects behind me, and he's created a really nice color contrast because I'm naturally quite orange, in case you didn't notice. But so orange brown tones, like so warm tones, right, including the desk and so on. Right, defined brand. And then behind me I've got blue on this side, and so the contrasting sort of warm with cool tones is always a really good idea. And so Sean's already built that into the lighting thing over here. He's got a hair light on me, he's got a soft source over there, and then another light source over there kind of as a fill. So he's done a pretty good job, and if it looks crap, it's just genetics, so I apologize for my parents. They're much better looking than I am, actually. But and then we've got more mobile setups with Kathy and Scott, and so they don't have $500,000 worth of gear and a DP on site to set it up. So anyway, sorry, Kathy, I interrupted.
No, that's fine. But I mean, it obviously it's everything in balance, right? You have the balance of your content, and if you have breaking news. Facebook actually had some interesting statistics. They stated that live streams get 6 times as many interactions, as many connections with viewers, customers, prospects than regular videos. So you might want to create the most produced video in the world, but live stream, being there, being present, like what we're doing today, sort of tilts the balance of those scales.
Yeah, there really is something about it. Sean, who's the guy who does the Fusion 360 live stream? Is it Lars?
Yeah, Lars. Oh, I can't remember his last name.
I forget his last name, but and I think he either did or he does work for Fusion. But so Fusion 360 is like a 3D modeling package that Sean and I have been getting into, and this guy Lars does like an hour-long live stream to explain certain aspects of this really complex application, and there's just something, and I watch the recorded versions. I've never watched one of his live streams, but they're all the recorded versions of a live stream that he did, and there's a different feeling about live. It just feels a little bit more interactive, like there's a bit more of a connection with the person, and maybe it's because you don't have the jump cuts. You don't also have that feeling that it's been like edited and kind of like packaged up. It just feels more organic, so this live stream that we're doing right now with you guys, this will on the same URL immediately afterwards, it'll kind of switch into the recorded version of the same thing. And I think when someone else is watching it 3 days from now, it'll be similar. They know that we haven't cut anything, and it was just exactly as it happened, and that has a nice feeling to it, doesn't it, Kathy?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you can't be here and you've we try to do the benefit of at least adding timestamps if you can't watch the live stream. So if you're watching this later, there are timestamps below so that you can jump around. But that live engagement, being able to come together as the Wordfence community here in the comments and chatting with Tim and Adam, it's always it's a good experience, you know, and it's really about creating an experience. There's an experience of reading, there's an experience of listening to a podcast while you're out, you know, running around with your dog, but there's an experience of a live stream, an experience of video. So it's kind of, what was it, Marshall McLuhan that said the medium is the message, and that experience colors what the user or the viewer or the listener is actually getting from it.
Cool. All right, when do we get to talk about gear?
We get to talk about gear soon, but one of the things we promised is to talk a little bit about podcasting. So before we go into, and I'm sorry, Scott, I feel like I'm taking the moderator.
No, Kathy's a natural leader. This is how she rolls.
I feel like
I love having Kathy and Mark on the stream here. They'll take it their own way, and it's always excellent. And we got some good comments here. Joost says, "Congrats from the Netherlands. Has not missed an episode yet. We really appreciate it." Raymond says video has become his primary vehicle here. So Kathy, we're seeing video content being used by other companies, and we're seeing it continue to grow.
Yeah.
It's just going to keep going, right?
I think so, yeah. Cisco, which is the company that makes the routers that make the internet, they stated that live internet video will account for 17% of internet video traffic by 2022. So it is becoming a big deal. So if your business is reliant upon bringing in new customers, content has to be a part of it. Podcasting has to be, audio has to be a part of it, video has to be a part of it. Your business is obviously going to be unique to you. You have to find out what works for you. Maybe a video isn't going to be the best way to connect with your customers. Maybe audio is. But you have to have, I think, a blend of things, and you cannot discount the power that video brings to the scene. But I wanted to talk a little bit about podcasting. Mark, a couple of years ago, you started Think Like a Hacker, and it was primarily a video-driven podcast, and we had the benefit of being able to go to a number of WordCamps and talk to a number of interesting people throughout the WordPress community, and we also did sort of the news of the day, and we've kind of evolved it since then. Do you want to talk about what your vision was with the podcast when we started?
Other than wanting an excuse to play with awesome gear, I'm just kidding. It was messy, I got to tell you, like, the reality of a lot of what we do and a lot of what I do is I just start, and so. I mean, with just like going back to Wordfence, there was a vision there. There was obviously an opportunity in the security space, but in a way, we just started writing the software and then got it out to the market and iterated based on customer feedback. And so, with Think Like a Hacker and our various media explorations, it was very much a case of just starting. With open.film, I think we got lucky in that we partnered with Andrew and Sean, who knew a heck of a lot more than us at the time, and we were able to kind of jumpstart filming that, and then we got it into post-production and muddled through it, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges there, but we ended up with an amazing product. And then with Think Like a Hacker, at one point in the show, Kerry, my wife and co-founder, and I were just on the road in our trailer, our Airstream, and we arrived in Idlewild in Southern California, up in the mountains, and made some friends and just started like interviewing people who are entrepreneurs, and someone in the WordPress community as well, John, who happened to be in town. WordPress is everywhere, it turns out. And it was great, but it was like high I wouldn't say stress. It wasn't like stressful, but it was high pressure because we were playing crew as well as talent. I was being on the camera interviewing folks. Kerry, has a degree in computer engineering. She doesn't come from film school, and so, learning to basically set up audio and cameras and tripods and so on, and it was amazing. Actually, we learned a heck of a lot, and we made some mistakes. One of the mistakes that I made is. Kathy, I think you know the story, but I went out to go and interview Corey Miller in, I forget the town that he's in, but it was like a few hundred miles east of here. I'm in just south of Denver. And I shot the whole interview with him, and I got on the plane and I was flying back, and I looked on my camera viewfinder at the footage, and it was out of focus. And there's like one or two things in video that you absolutely cannot fix. And one of them is being out of focus. Another one is audio clipping. For example, if your volume is too loud and you're distorting the audio, you cannot fix that. Right. And so that was like a hard lesson. And I went out the next week, and thank you, Corey, you're amazing. We reshot the interview, and it was actually better. And we had an awesome time at the bar afterwards, and we ended up with a great product at the end of it. But yeah, it's been a bit of an adventure.
Yeah, and an amazing learning experience. I mean, that's part of the deal is, I think with anything, with audio and video, there's this desire for everything to be absolutely perfect, but
right.
It's not going to be perfect. Your episode 1 is going to be like the worst one, right?
Yeah, and the trick is to like get burnt. Okay,
yes.
Like screw up big time, and that burn, that scar will stay with you. So like every shoot that I'm on now, it's like, are we in focus? Are you sure? Do you have focus peaking turned on? Have we double checked? Have you looked at it on a monitor that's bigger than this, which is your little camera viewfinder? And then the same with audio, right? So yeah, you learn.
Yes, definitely. And we're up to episode, I think it's 112 this week, with Think Like a Hacker. And we've gone through a number of iterations. Scott, for a while, you were going solo with Think Like a Hacker. How was that experience for you?
And this is the audio podcast, right?
Right, the audio podcast,
right.
Think Like a Hacker, right.
Right.
I was terrified initially, I remember when Mark called, he said, how would you feel about doing the podcast alone? But thankfully, you also said, it'd be a shorter version. So, it took a little while. Just like you said, it takes, some iterations. And it was a few episodes in that I started feeling pretty comfortable with it. And I always tell people, though, you and Ram together, it seems like a perfect combo for the podcast. So if any of the viewers out there have not listened into the podcast yet, go ahead and check it out now, because in my opinion, it's in a really good spot right now with you and Ram. It's just the back and forth is what we were missing, kind of whenever I was on there. It was kind of straightforward news, almost like the ticker at the bottom of a right there. That was kind of the podcast for me. But now we have that back and forth, and you two are both excellent on there. So it's kind of it's grown there.
And I tried to do it myself, but I'm also going in about 1,000 different directions. And I found that when I did it with Mark at the onset, it was very easy. And now when Ram and I just have a flow. So I think that is one of the learnings that we got from the podcast, is that having two people together makes it, one, more conversational, easier to listen to, but it also gives this kind of accountability. I check with Ram, are you ready? He checks with me, are you ready? And that accountability really helps in getting it out every single week, because consistency with content is also another thing that we found to be incredibly important. This live stream has been, it takes us some work to put this together every week. And every once in a while, we're like, Mark, can we please take a week off? And he gives us every once in a while. But he's also
because I'm like a slave driver, right? I'm like, no,
Well, I think you help us find ways of making it happen, but you remind us that consistency of showing up every week is really important.
Well, yeah, I think it applies to whatever you're doing, if it's a blog as well. If you're writing, whether it's a podcast or a video show, whatever. I think the whole idea of like being an instant hit is a complete illusion, and it really is about consistency. When I would blog, on my personal blog. I started early 2000s on Movable Type, if anyone remembers that. Ben and Mina Trott's blogging platform written in Perl. And of course, everyone bailed and went to WordPress when they changed the license on that. But it took me years, and by 2007-ish, I was really getting some traction. I was consistently #1 on Hacker News, and so on.
Wow.
And I was mostly blogging about entrepreneurship, and then I stopped around 2008 or 9 because I realized I had never actually built a successful business. I was just talking about it, and I needed to focus on building a business. So. But yeah, that consistency really managed to grow that traffic, and that's applied to everything that we've done. The podcast, our YouTube content, the Wordfence blog, which gets massive traffic now. So yeah, totally agree with you, Kathy.
Definitely.
I was going to say, Mark wants to talk about some gear. We have a lot to show off.
Yeah, so there's some interesting things that have happened in the last few years that have made the kind of processes and technology that Hollywood uses, which used to be insanely expensive, and I'll give you some specific numbers, very accessible. And those workflows are not used by most publishers on YouTube. And in fact, even a lot of sort of film shops that make corporate media don't use this stuff. And so I wanted to talk through some of those changes because I think that they reveal really powerful opportunities for content creators, particularly in the video space and a little bit in the audio space as well. There's some things that you can't get away from, like good glass. If I will just dive right in if you guys
go for
want
it.
Me to.
Yeah.
Can you tell that I'm interested in doing that?
And you're gonna talk about some of the software tools that you use as well as some of the hardware stuff too. Okay, great.
Yeah. So the way I'm going to break this up, and I have a bunch of notes here. So if I'm looking at my screen rather than looking at you, that's what that's about. There's a lot. So the way I'm going to break this up is we're going to chat about capture first. So actually going out and getting whatever it is that, whatever story you want to tell or media you want to shoot. So actually capturing it and how to do that, and then post-production, sort of taking it through the post-production workflow into final shipping. So we'll start off with capture. I am going to preface this by saying that it is really fun to buy gear, and you don't need to spend a ridiculous amount of money to create amazing content. There are films out there, like feature-length films and other content that has made a ton of money or been incredibly popular on YouTube, and it's shot on an iPhone or some basic camera. The most important thing is actually whatever the content is. If you're bringing a really exciting story or providing the viewer with new information or a new capability, that is the most compelling thing. That is the most important thing. Going over to B&H and dropping 10 grand on gear isn't going to make you famous. But getting the right gear and kind of picking your battles and getting your processes set up can help, and it can help kind of smooth your workflow, reduce risk, and so on. So let's get into it. So when we started filming, and when we did Open, which you can find at open.film, sorry, I think I just blew your swag question there, Kathy.
No,
but,
you're fine.
Okay, we started filming it on Sony A7S, and I think they were mostly A7S2s, right, Sean?
Yeah, they were.
Okay, and so that camera is this little guy, and can you guys see this? Because I'm actually not looking at the shot right now.
There you go.
Okay,
You're
cool.
full screen now.
All right. Yeah. So this is kind of like a digital SLR, but it's an evolution on that it is what they call a mirrorless camera. So it's more compact because it doesn't have a sort of a reflex mirror built in that kind of like sends a light up to the viewfinder. It just shows you what you're seeing on the screen over here. The A7S was like super popular with initially stills photographers and then also videographers because it was really light sensitive. It could handle low light really well. It's also super compact. It's what are these, about 1,500 to 2 grand, something like that, which in the world of camera, surprisingly, is not that expensive. And so they're really great for what Sean and Andrew were doing. And Sean, I think you guys had these set up with, I'm assuming Sony lenses and some kind of sort of matte box.
Yeah, we had a matte box, and then we also had a 4K recorder attached to them, so we could record onto the Atomos Shogun.
Yeah, okay. I might try to grab an Atomos from our shelves over here in a second just to show you, or you can just look it up. But the Atomos Ninja V or Ninja 5, and then also the Atomos Shogun is an external display that you can attach to this using micro HDMI. And it lets you have a bigger screen. It's really bright. The Ninja V is 1,000 nits. And I hate that setup. And the reason I hate it is because we've done a lot of shooting on this as well. You know, Sean and I, Kerry and I, and the micro HDMI. I think you all know what an HDMI cable is, but there's a very small sort of HDMI form factor. It's one of the plugs on this thing, but it keeps disconnecting. And so you're doing this shoot. It's like you've lined up this amazing talent. You know, this person that you're interviewing. You had to like wait weeks to, you know, get scheduled with them. You flew out to wherever and you've got it all set up now and the interview is going great, and all of a sudden it cuts out on the external display, the Ninja V or the Shogun, and that's also a recorder that's recording at a higher color depth than the camera can record, and so you're losing that footage. And it happens really often with micro HDMI, and so that's why I hate that setup. What the pros use is something called SDI, which is this. This is a BNC connector, and you can, we actually have a run going from the warehouse over here about 100 feet back to where Sean is, and it's super robust. It's totally bulletproof. It's what's used in video villages in Hollywood when they're doing like a really expensive shoot, and they have a feed going back to the to where the DP and the director are sitting. This is how they connect, and so it's a bit of a trade-off, because these smaller cameras, the A7S, and we'll chat about the these guys as well. This is a Blackmagic 6K, which has a similar form factor to a digital SLR. They tend to have either micro or mini HDMI outputs. If you can get a camera with SDI, generally the ENG cameras, which are these big boys, electronic news gathering cameras, have the outputs, and you can actually see on this guy there's the outputs in the back there. The smaller form factor cameras don't generally have SDI. They'll generally have HDMI. If you can, try to get full-size HDMI. If you can't, get mini HDMI. If you can't get that, life's going to suck, because you're going to have micro HDMI and it's going to keep disconnecting. So
I mean, HDMI in general, I prefer SDI over any type of HDMI.
Right. Yep, yeah. Totally agree. Yeah, and so I think, Sean, we've got 12G SDI, which is a really fast SDI running from here to your sort of video village back in your office. And I think that, does that handle the 4.6K that these Ursus put out?
That'll handle 4.6K, and it'll also handle 60 frames a second.
Okay, cool.
Which is the big leap from the 6G cable.
Yeah, okay, great. So let's chat a little bit about what you're capturing into these cameras. On these guys, you're capturing something called log, and the entire open film was shot in S-Log2, and I think there might have accidentally been some S-Log3 in there, Sean. Is that right?
There was, and there's some very, very early ProRes RAW.
Okay, and so what that is, a log is basically, when you capture it, and when you're looking at it on the viewfinder, it looks pretty bad. It looks really flat, like there's no contrast, and that's intentional. What they've done is they've taken what the camera's capturing and applied a curve to it so that they can give you a little bit more dynamic range. What dynamic range is I'm going to explain it in this way. If you have a scene that you're shooting, that subject has a dynamic range, and it is the distance between the darkest darks and the brightest brights. Your camera has a dynamic range, which is the darkest darks it can capture and the brightest brights it can capture. And if your camera doesn't have as much dynamic range as your scene, you're going to miss stuff. Okay, so this camera right here, this big boy, has a dynamic range of 14.5 stops, which is how you measure dynamic range. This little guy has, what is this, Sean, with S-Log, do you think? 11.
I think you can get
12.
I think you get 11 stops out of camera. If you hook it up to one of those Atomos, you tend to get 12 stops. It goes to 442.
Okay. Now that's a logarithmic scale, so 12 stops is a lot less than 14.5 stops of dynamic range, which means that when you're shooting with this guy, you're going to potentially miss some darks or miss some brights depending on how you've exposed it. S-Log takes your darkest darks and your brightest brights and everything else and applies a curve to it that kind of reduces contrast and lets you capture more. I can't stand S-Log. This is so you're kind of gathering that there's a lot that I don't like about these cameras, because when you bring it into post and you're actually grading it when you're doing a color grade, and I'll show you how that works in a second. I actually did the color grade on Open with the help of Sean's excellent eyes, and I graded it from S-Log into something that looked sort of normal, which is Rec 709. That's kind of the standard for what TV looks like, and then we added a look to it, and that process was a bit painful. We've learned a lot more, and you can make it a little bit easier. But one of the things that you get with these Sonys is the darks. If you're a little bit underexposed, you can end up with purple grain in the darks. And so once the footage on these guys starts falling apart, in other words, the grain starts showing because you're kind of bringing up those darks a little bit, it looks really awful. So
you can actually see, if you look at my shot right now, Mark, I've turned off our LUT that I put on, so this is actually
there you go.
raw. So you can see the difference in the contrast ratios between the 3 shots on screen and mine.
Yeah.
And then if I turn our LUT back on.
And Sean, is that just a Rec 709 LUT? Oh, my Mac's about to go to sleep. Oh my God.
Yeah, it's one that I put together.
Hold on a sec, guys. I need to plug in my power. I'll be right back. Sean, good luck.
Thank
you.
you.
I'll be back in one minute.
I could really tell the difference in your shot, Sean. Before
Absolutely.
it was just like, what happened? I couldn't tell that, but it makes a huge difference.
And this is usually what we're capturing on set. Yeah, is this? You'll apply a LUT so you can actually see in camera what it's going to look like in final production. But yeah, this is what the camera is seeing.
I wasn't sure if Mark was going to cover it, but I had a question. As far as the capture stage for Open goes, how long were you filming for that? How long were you doing interviews, and how long did capturing the footage take overall?
We were a little unstructured as far as, most documentaries and most films, they'll try to do everything within a 1 month, 2 month period. We stretched Open almost a year. And the reason why is because we were going to different WordCamps, and so we were utilizing that as our locations.
Because when you started Open, you didn't really know what the story was going to be at first, I remember. It was just like, let's go see what story's there. So
I barely knew what WordPress was.
Right.
So it was a large learning curve for me, to say the least. But yeah, we had to learn very slowly what there was, and then find the story within that.
Yeah, and then I remember during that process, sorry, Scott, but during that process, it was really hard to actually find the story, but then it just all kind of came together, like over the course of a weekend. You just basically found the story, and it came to life.
It did, yeah.
How did you find that story? Is there any sort of creative process that
I can tell you for one, I think the mistake we made, and this is with any documentary, you don't want to just go out and shoot footage and then come back to the editing booth and find a story. You tend to want to go out with a story in mind and capture as much of that as you can. We didn't have that. So yeah, so the first couple iterations you guys all saw, those are not so good. And then, like you say, I locked myself in a room. And really what it was is I just reviewed the footage and said, who's my hero here? And we found a hero within the piece in Carol Stambaugh. And I
love Carol.
With having Carol as kind of our center figure, I was able to build everything around that. And I think when I showed you guys on Monday, it was a completely different story than what we had arranged first couple times.
So Carol Stambaugh is sort of like the mom of WordPress and the Phoenix WordPress community, dedicates a lot of her life to helping people get the most out of WordPress, and Sean really found that story there, and captured what Carol brings. So you'll notice it when you see Open if you haven't watched it yet.
All right.
Yeah,
You guys hear me okay now?
Yeah,
I can
welcome back.
queue
we
up
do,
a
yeah.
clip of Open whenever you want to, Kathy.
Oh, sure. Mark, are you ready? Should we show a clip of Open since we just kind of talked about it?
Yeah, why not? Go for it.
Okay, great.
Okay, cool. Let me share my screen here. This is my first time doing the stuff that everybody else does on screen. Okay. Share this. And this is just a little snippet from Phoenix. Enjoy.
Cool. So no sound on that, unfortunately, but it's funny, Sean, looking at that, you're muted, by the way. I have like a bit of like post-traumatic stress from the grading process because I remember Phoenix was so yellow, and then the footage that we shot on the A7Ss, these guys was yellow coming out of S-Log as well. It has that natural yellowness to it, and it was really hard to make some of those shots look balanced, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it was a couple weeks down in that basement.
Yeah, yeah. The shot of there's some cool stuff that we did though. Like there's an older lady in the audience, and the camera is kind of like panning. Remember we did a power window on that to kind of like highlight her.
Just to get her, yeah. I forgot
Yeah,
about that.
yeah. So in Resolve, which I'll walk through you guys through in a second, which is amazing and it's totally free and most people don't know about it. When we were doing the color grade, we one of the tricks we used because we wanted to emphasize a member of the audience, we put a power window, which is basically just a sort of a selection with a feather on this person, and then tracked them as they moved across the screen, and up the exposure on that area, and then reduce the exposure on everything else. So it was almost like, yeah, there, exactly. Like there was a little bit of it's really subtle, but it just kind of like emphasizes that subject in the frame. And the tools to do this are totally free. You don't need to pay Adobe, whatever the heck they're charging these days. So yeah. Cool. Can I keep going?
Yeah.
On some of the process and the gear here. All right. So we've chatted about different cameras. This is a Blackmagic 6K. What do they call these guys, Sean? It's like a
Pocket cinema camera.
Pocket cinema. That's it. Yeah. And it's not good for stills. This is for video, but it has the same form factor as a digital SLR. It's maybe a little chunkier. It's maybe like a Canon 5D with a little bit of a chunky grip over here. But what this does is it captures your media. Instead of capturing it into a log curve like S-Log on this, it actually captures sensor raw data. So if you have done photography, you've heard about shooting raw, which gives you kind of the raw data from the sensor that you can then play with in post and do all kinds of things like adjusting your ISO in post, which is amazing. This does the same for film, and it's not actually that crazy expensive for what it does. Now, Red and Ari are the two big cinema cameras that Hollywood uses, and Red in particular became famous for providing the ability to shoot raw video, which gives you a huge amount of flexibility in post-production. Red had a patent on shooting raw, and Blackmagic were able to work around that patent by doing something called partial debayering. So what they're actually doing is it's not true raw. They do a little bit of processing in camera, and then they give you all of the data that you need to essentially have the flexibility of having shot in raw, but the performance is actually better because the camera's already done some processing for you. And so when you're shooting with this, you're shooting raw. You can choose how much or how little compression you want. So you can actually shoot in a compressed raw format, which is amazing. And you don't have to pay $30,000 to do that. You pay, it's about $5K for one of these Ursas, maybe $6K for the camera body. And then these are maybe half that price, but don't quote me on that. But I love shooting with Blackmagic. The first time we went from Sony to Blackmagic, we got an Ursa, that ENG camera I just held up, and we were in Vegas at DEF CON, and our team was in a bar in a hotel, and I just wanted to shoot something. So I grabbed the camera and I went into the bar and I started filming, and then I went downstairs to my room, and I put the footage I brought it into Resolve, which is also made by Blackmagic. So it really integrates well with their raw format and so on. And I started pushing the footage around. I started bringing up the shadows, thinking, okay, so it's going to show me that purple grain that these A7Ss would show me. And I couldn't break it. It was like there's no grain. I'm able to like bring up those shadows and see detail, and it looks amazing. And then when I did finally manage to push the footage enough to show some graininess, it actually looked good. It looked cinematic. It looked like film grain, and it just blew my mind. And I was instantly addicted to Blackmagic. And guys, just so you know, we don't have an affiliate. There's no affiliate links in the show. I don't have a relationship with Blackmagic. We've bought and paid for all this stuff. I'm not getting anything out of promoting them. I just love their gear and their post-production workflow in DaVinci Resolve. So this little guy is incredible because it shoots at 6K. So you can kind of crop your image down to exactly what you want to frame. Gives you a little bit of extra latitude, and it shoots in RAW. And the other thing is that, and this is a big deal, and this is something that I discovered, and it was a bit of an expensive discovery. So these Sonys, they use an E-mount lens, and I don't have any E-mounts because we burnt them all, because I hate E-mount lenses. And the trouble with an E-mount lens is that the flange distance between the lens and the sensor is really, really small because it's a mirrorless camera. You can ignore what I just said. The bottom line is you can't take those E-mount lenses and put them on any other camera. You can't adapt them to any other camera. So you're kind of like stuck. You make this huge investment in these amazing Sony E primes, and then you discover, I want to try to use one of them on my Canon digital SLR or on one of these, and you can't. And so I don't buy Sony lenses anymore because of that. I buy Canon lenses. And Canon lenses, you can adapt to a Sony. And this is actually a Canon mount on these newer 6Ks. And then this guy has a Canon lens on it right now. And with these Ursas, one of the things that you get, one of the things that makes them really flexible is you can change the lens mount on that to a PL mount, which is the sort of professional Hollywood mount. And then I think there's another option as well. You don't happen to remember what it is, Sean. It's like PL, Canon, and something else.
MF.
Okay.
It's the MF mount. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So it's a little bit of a process. You don't really want to do that on set, but it does give you that flexibility. And so what we do now is we use Canon lenses, which are awesome. Canon makes amazing glass. And we'll use them on these 6Ks and on the Ursas. And then we can even just take that same Canon lens and put it directly onto a digital SLR if we're shooting stills. So the lenses that we use are either these L lenses. This is, I think one of them, is this my 50? This is a 50mm prime, which is a really awesome lens if you're shooting interviews, portrait photography, or anything like that. This is a 1.2 prime, which means that the aperture opens really wide, and the wider your aperture, the shallower your depth of field, the shallower your focus. So you can open this guy wide up, point it at someone. I think we filmed Cami Chaos using this lens. Hey, Sean. I don't know if you were on that shoot.
Yeah. It wasn't me, but I remember the shot.
Yeah. And at the moment I looked at the preview of the shot with this lens, and I think it might have been one of our Blackmagic cameras. I was blown away. She looked absolutely amazing, and Cami looks amazing in general with her jet black hair. So using a shallow depth of field on her with this lens was great. So this is an L lens, and it's sort of the higher end consumer lens that Canon make. And then there's another kind of level above that, and what that is these guys. This is a cinema lens, and this is actually your standard Canon lens mount. So you can put this on any Canon mount, including this, a 5D, that Ursa over there with the Canon mount. This lens is made out of metal. It has gearing over here for a focus pulling system. It has unbelievably good glass, and then the way these cinema lenses work is they are calibrated, which means that they're not f-stops, they're t-stops, which just means that the aperture, in other words, how much light's coming in, has actually been calibrated at a factory. It's not sort of a guesstimate, which is what an f-stop is with these L lenses. It's super accurate.
Wow.
So don't buy these, ever. You don't need to. L lenses are amazing, and
But
you
they
can
look
rent these.
cool.
They look cool, and we have a lot of them. I think there's an 85 mil pointed at me right now, and this is actually the other 85 that we have. And that's actually, Sean, maybe you can expand on that 85 being. You introduced me to that focal length as a really great focal length for interviews.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, Mark is on an 85, and I'm actually on a 35 millimeter. And one of the main reasons is the distance from the camera. Mark's camera is about 20 feet away from him right now. My camera is about 4 feet away from me. So a 35 mil is going to give you a wider field of view. An 85 mil is going to give you a tighter field of view, but it's going to be able to get this really cool compression look where you see in Mark's shot, where that van is actually another probably 50 feet behind Mark,
Right.
but it looks like I've brought it closer to him. And then again, Mark was talking about aperture being open. I think I have you at like a 2.0.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at Kathy or Scott's shots, those are just regular webcams, and those are going to be somewhere around like f10, f11, where everything is in focus, and so they're not really blurring out the backgrounds.
Yeah, and that tip that Sean just mentioned. Where's the aperture ring on this guy? There we go. Yeah, so this actually opens up to 1.3, and I don't know if you can see. Let me see if I can. There you go. There. Oh, there you go. So you can actually. Not quite. All right. Well, anyway, imagine you can see the aperture. So one of the things that makes lenses more expensive is a larger aperture, because you can see with this 85, it's got a lot of gloss in it, and that big aperture needs more gloss. And so this goes to a T 1.3, which is kind of like f1.3. Which is really wide, and Sean has it at a 2.0 right now because he wants to have a bit of depth of field. Like when I move my hand here, it's still kind of in focus. You can actually see right there it starts to get out of focus, but I've got focus from about here until maybe the back of my chair. When you get down to f1.2, which is what this guy will do, this is the L lens I was mentioning, you're like the tip of your nose will be in focus, but your ears will be out of focus.
Wow.
But that technique that you mentioned, Sean, is one of my favorites, where a zoom lens, what it does is it compresses the background onto the subject. So we use that. I use that here in Colorado a lot because we have the Rockies, and they're actually quite far away. And so, you see these images of Colorado, and you have this image of like the Rockies towering over, you in Denver or whatever. Well, it doesn't actually look like that. But what they do is they take a zoom lens, and they'll sort of back up a little bit and then zoom in on the subject, and it takes whatever's behind them and brings it on top of them. And there's some amazing, there's a local photographer who shoots the wild, well, not actually shoots with a gun, but takes pictures of the wild horses on the BLM land in the sort of northwestern part of the state. And what she does is uses I think it's a 400 or a 600 prime lens, which is a very long lens, and it allows her to take those gorgeous snowy mountains and compress them on top of the horses, and she ends up with these incredible photos. So that's a really great technique. All right, I'm going to just keep going over here, Kathy, or do you want to kind of jump in?
Matt Strausser asked who the gearhead at Wordfence is, and I think we all know.
Don't disqualify yourself, Sean. You're a bit of a gearhead too, you know. In fact,
I'm in there.
You should show them a photo of your office. I'm just in the warehouse over here, surrounded by gear that we happen to have put here. He's permanently surrounded by gear.
Wow.
Okay, that's a photo I took of Sean this morning.
Yeah, that's how I'm set up right now.
Yeah, and you'll notice the liquor cabinet to his left. I'm not sure what that means, but yeah.
Doesn't look like it's in arm's reach though, so that would be the issue that I see there, Sean.
Yeah, obviously he's making good choices. Okay, so I'm going to just run through some additional stuff here, guys, folks. All right, so tripods. In fact, let's just talk about cameras a little bit more. So these ENGs, they have some advantages. You know, they've got the SDI, they've got much bigger battery capacity, but more dynamic range. One of the big and underrated advantages of these cameras is that they're easy to use. You'd think, you know, with cameras, especially consumer cameras, you buy more and more expensive cameras and things get more complex. The manuals get thicker and so on. What actually happens is when you get to a certain level, it starts going the other way. And so RE Alexas, for example, are unbelievably easy to use, and those are super expensive. They're used for, it's probably might still be the most popular film camera to shoot feature films with. And those are really easy to use because it's risk mitigation. You know, you don't want a assistant camera person to get confused right before this really important shoot. You know, Tom Cruise comes out and he's about to do the thing and they're paying him, $50 million an hour or whatever Tom gets paid. And the camera guy's like, oh man, I can't find my way through this menu. So they get easier as they become more sort of professional. But these cameras are really heavy, like really heavy.
I was going to ask Mark, where would a Blackmagic camera such as what you have there fall on that scale of ease of use?
You're talking about this ENG camera specifically, this Ursa?
The littler Blackmagic camera that you have? Yep.
So they've actually done a really good job because, Sean, if I'm not mistaken, the menu system on this is the same as the menu system on the Ursa, right? Or similar?
It's almost identical, but somehow the user interface is easier.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you've ever used a Sony camera, which is really something that's evolved out of the digital SLR still photography world and morphed into a film camera, this went the other way. Blackmagic are a cinema company, and so these cameras that have a digital SLR form factor are derived from the much bigger cameras, and so the menu is really easy to use. And you lose certain things like you don't have as much battery life, although I think you might be able to put an external battery on this. But there's the battery bay door at the bottom there. With these, you can pretty much have infinite battery, just however much weight you want on the camera. This is HDMI, that's SDI, a little bit less dynamic range, but these are amazing. I love these. So with ENG, you have those benefits, but then they're more expensive and they're heavier. Most folks in at least the WordPress community that want to go out and shoot any kind of film, they're going to want the portability. Even if you're shooting from your house, you're going to want to be able to take that thing on a plane. When Sean and I went to, I think it was WordCamp US, Sean, does it 13 bags we checked in?
13 cases, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, here's a little pro tip. Should we tell them about the press pass thing?
Absolutely.
Okay, it's a little sneaky. You didn't hear that here, but I don't know if I should share this. So if you go to the National Press Association, you join them, you can get a press pass. I think it's like $50 or something like that. And you can then go to the airline check-in and show them your press pass, and they'll charge you a flat rate of, I think it's $50 per bag. We ended up paying a hell of a lot. Does that sound about right, Sean?
Yeah, it was $50. You said before the press pass, it was $50 per bag. After the press pass, it was $50 total.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Okay.
For all the bags.
Okay.
All
yeah.
of them, no matter how many you had.
Yeah. So you didn't hear that here. Do not quote us. Okay, we deny all knowledge of this, but that's a way to save a heck of a lot of money on baggage fees. And we have been traveling a lot to shoot film. We were traveling a lot for Open and so on. So it was legitimate. You know, we were legitimate documentary filmmakers at the time. I happen to have that press pass still in my backpack. I may or may not use it from time to time, but you know, you want to travel light and don't kind of get wrapped up into that thing where you're taking your entire studio with you. So these are great. So the other thing that I wanted to chat about is tripods, and these are kind of your consumer level, you know, photographer tripods. They're great, and you can fit one of these 6Ks onto it. You know, anything that's got sort of a digital SLR form factor. When you go over to ENG, you're going to have to haul around one of these, which is really heavy. This is Sean's tripod with a fluid head. It's unbelievably stable, and it has incredibly smooth motion. This is actually a carbon fiber version of the same thing, also with a fluid head, and I can never pronounce this vendor's name, but it's Sackler. Sean, is that right?
Yeah, Sackler. Yeah, and those are some of the best tripods on the market right now.
Yeah, and when you think about this stuff, and even the smaller tripods, you know, think about, I'm just going to move this out of the way again. Think about the tripod's legs and the head as two separate things, because they actually generally are. When you get into the higher end stuff, you'll buy the legs and then you'll choose a fluid head for the tripod. With the smaller tripods, you kind of get the head with it. And the downside is that, you know, if the wind's blowing a little bit, you might get a little camera shake, and then you have to deal with that in post, which completely sucks. So a heavier tripod is a real pain in the butt to transport, but it is a risk mitigation strategy, right? You get a much more stable shot when you're, you know, panning. It's much smoother, and so on. And then I'm going to get onto post-production in a second, but if you are doing any sort of color work, get one of these. This is a color checker. And what you do is you hold this up for the shot, and right before you actually start filming the thing you want to film, and then you bring it into DaVinci Resolve, and you can just sort of draw a box over it and say, adjust the color to a baseline, and it will use the color. It knows what colors these are, and so it will adjust the entire sort of palette to look the way that it should have looked on the way it actually looked on the day, and then you can use that as a starting point for your actual grade. And when you forget to do this, it's a real pain in the butt. So it's super powerful to do. This is a very big one. We're just using this one to show you. You get much smaller ones that are like little books that you can take with you, and you just get your talent or subject to kind of hold that up. Just make sure you don't touch the colors, because you'll kind of change them, you know, make them duller with your fingerprints, and that will cause you to get an incorrect sort of starting grade. Let's see what else I got. Sean, I guess if folks are shooting video, they want to do 24 frames per second.
Yeah, I mean, it's really what you're going for. So if you're going for that filmic look, 24 frames a second kind of has almost a flashy effect to the human eye. 30 frames per second is a little more seamless, and then you go all the way up to 60 frames a second, and you'll see things like what you see on brand new TVs when you're watching sports and stuff, like where it's literally almost like fluid. There's no individual frames that you can pick out. So yeah. Yes, to your original question, 24 frames per second is my favorite. And
yeah, so 24 frames per second is what Hollywood films are shot on, and it's actually an inferior frame rate, because you're getting less information, and it isn't as crisp and clear as 60, as Sean was saying. But try shooting 60 frames a second and then publishing that, and it looks cheap. Because it has this sort of VHS video 1980s feel. Like the 80s kind of programmed us to prefer 24 frames per second, because everything's shot on video, including like soap operas. Did you know I was addicted to Loving for a while, Kathy? Like, I actually was addicted to a soap opera. Like, anyway,
I need General Hospital over here.
Yeah. So the soaps were shot on video, and that was a higher frame rate, and it looked cheap. And film, like celluloid, was 24 frames a second, and it felt Hollywood, and that has persisted up until today. And so we're stuck shooting low frame rates, which is actually less information that you're capturing, but it's got that sort of Hollywood feel to it. And then when it comes to your shutter speed, the way you want to think about it is in film cameras, they have a shutter that is measured in degrees. Because I'm not going to try to describe to you the mechanics of a celluloid camera, but 180 degrees of shutter is double whatever your frame rate is. So it'll be, if you're doing 24 frames per second, you're at 180 degrees, which is kind of the standard for Hollywood. You will be shooting 1/48th of a second shutter speed. Now, it's important to note that, and that'll give you a really Hollywood feel. You can make that faster if you want, but at 1/48th, there's a certain amount of blur that comes into motion shots that also feels more filmic. And you kind of have to make your trade-offs. If you're doing some sort of action scene and you want it to be more crisp, you can make your shutter speed faster, but it's not going to have, you're going to lose a bit of that filmic feel. And so you kind of, when we shoot, a lot of the time, what we try to do is lock it at 24 frames per second, 1/48th shutter speed or 1/50th, because cameras sometimes don't go in increments that small, but it's close enough. And then we're playing with the aperture to adjust exposure. In other words, we can't change our shutter speed to a faster shutter speed to reduce the amount of light coming into the camera, so we have to adjust the aperture. And when you do that, if you've got too much light coming in and you make your aperture smaller, and you want this effect that we've got right here with shallow depth of field, you can't have that. You have to make a choice, right? Because your aperture is going to be small, so your depth of field is very deep. I know this is a lot, but hopefully you can rewind and Google this stuff if necessary. And so the trick that we use, and this is really, really another powerful tip if you don't know about it, is we use ND filters. These filters reduce the amount of light coming into a camera, and it lets us shoot very bright situations with a big aperture that gives us that shallow depth of field for that more sort of artistic look. ND is, these are just consumer ND filters. They're kind of junky. We have some really nice ND filters around here somewhere that you can put into a matte box. That are very high quality. And the whole idea of ND filter is that all it does is reduce the amount of light coming in. It doesn't change the colors. So be careful about buying cheap ND filters, because they can, the corners can be a little darker than the center or vice versa, or they can change the colors. So get good quality ND if you're doing that. So you want to shoot 24 frames a second, 1/48th or 1/50th shutter speed. And then if you want to do a big aperture, you use ND to reduce the amount of light coming into the camera. And then one last tip regarding ND filters. I've got the this Airstream to the left of me over here, which we're going to be using as a mobile studio. More on that soon. But a trick if you want to shoot inside a building or a trailer in this case, and you also want to see the outside world, is you take ND film, which is not super expensive, and you put it on the windows, and that reduces the amount of light coming in to the trailer, so that it matches the outside brightness with the inside brightness, so that you can set your exposure just for one thing, the inside, and you put ND on the windows, and now you can also see what's outside. It's not this like super bright blown out just whiteness that's out there. So that's another trick that's kind of used by the pros.
Because typically when you do something like that, you're backlit completely, right? So it's like all the light's coming from, and so whatever you're filming on the inside gets all dark, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah, it's a nightmare. And Carrie and I, when we were shooting on the road, when we were doing Think Like a Hacker, the sort of video version on the road, we didn't have ND on the windows, and it was a real pain. We had to make some compromises. We had to move the trailer, park it under trees. It was just a real pain in the butt. I've left out one variable, and that's ISO. If you want to reduce the sensitivity of your sensor, you can make your ISO lower, which allows you to deal with too much light. ISO has some trade-offs, though. If you make it too high, you end up with grain. Sean, we were just chatting before we went live on the show, and you were saying that it's really a good idea to try to find the native ISO of your camera.
Yeah, a lot of cameras have a native ISO or ISO, depending on how you want to say it, that the sensor is actually designed and engineered at. And so A common misconception is if you go to the lowest ISO on your camera, say 100 or 200, you'll have a very grain-free image. And that might be the case, but your sensor is actually maybe built for 320 ISO, 400 ISO in the case of our Blackmagics. And at that point, you're actually getting the highest dynamic range, you're getting the best color rendering, basically all the best capture qualities of that camera when you find the native ISO. And you can just look this up online. I just wanted to address a couple points Svein here made as well. He says 60 frames per second for the win. Forget 24 frames per second. He's right. 24 frames per second came along in Hollywood because they were looking for the cheapest way to shoot film. And if they cut out 6 frames every second instead of shooting 30 frames per second, over the course of a film, they're saving quite a bit of money. Now, we don't have film anymore.
Yeah,
exactly. And we don't have film anymore. And so to your point about 60 frames per second, if you don't know what you're going to use your final piece for, or maybe it's an action scene, you don't know if you want to slow it down, shooting something at 60 frames per second digitally is actually kind of nice because it gives you that latitude in post to slow it down almost 3 to 4 times true speed. So yeah, you made a lot of points there. You also talked about PAL and NTSC. You talked about shutter speed, Mark, and sometimes it only goes up to 1/50th. That's because, a lot of PAL cameras shoot in 25 frames per second, 50 frames per second. Which is, European, African standards, some of the other countries. So
now you can't have, I think technically you might be able to do this, but in general, you can't have a shutter speed that is slower than your frames per second, right? So you can't shoot at 60 frames per second with a 1/50th shutter speed.
You could.
You might be able to do it digitally.
Yeah, digitally you could. And I think actually it's called, I believe it was called frame stepping. Back in the day, but it would give you almost like a dreamy look where your frames would step on top of each other.
Okay.
Because you're literally shooting over the top of each.
But in general, you don't want to do that. And remember that when you're shooting at 1/48th or 1/50th, you're getting a little bit of blur in your because it's a slower shutter speed. And so if you're shooting at 60 frames per second, you can't do that without getting some interesting effects. And so that's another thing that contributes to that filmic look. And that's why 24 frames per second, 1/48th or 1/50th shutter speed works quite well. So
you're also sacrificing light when you go up to 1/60th of a second. Your shutter, or your mirror, or your sensor is only getting light for 1/60th of a second, as opposed to 1/24th of a second.
Yeah, it's at 60 frames per second.
Light.
Yeah.
So you actually have to compensate with your ISO and your aperture. So talking about the exposure triangle right there.
Yeah,
it's a whole nother show.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so let's chat about lighting for a few minutes. And Kathy, we are going to go way over, I think. So
okay.
Is that okay? do you have a meeting that you're running up against?
Just
because you can just do that on the show.
We can just do it live here.
Right. Okay, so let's chat about lighting for a second. I recommend a light meter if you're walking into a scene and you don't know what you're going to be dealing with once you set up your cameras. Get one of these, and it'll show you what your shutter speed needs to be for a given f-stop and a certain ISO setting, so you've kind of got those 3 variables, and you can change any one of them. But it'll give you a feel for what you're dealing with when you walk into a scene. And once you learn how to use one of those, it's going to really reduce your stress levels. All right, so soft lighting is what Sean has set up here. If it doesn't look soft, that's my crappy complexion. So it's not his fault. It's my fault. But Sean's actually got, is it 6 foot by 6 foot, Sean?
Yeah, it's got 6 foot by 6 foot. It is a half grid soft cloth.
Okay, and just for fun, I'm actually going to try something over here. I'm going to do this, and if you guys can see that, that is what I'm looking at right there. Okay, and that's a let's see if I can kind of align this a little bit better. But that's a grid that's 6 foot by 6 foot. He's got a light behind that. It's shining at the grid, and it's diffusing the light so that it's not a point source, which means that I get softer shadows. So if you look at my face, you'll see, if you look at someone's nose in particular, the sort of shadow on their nose, you see there's no kind of hard triangle over here. It's more of like soft shadows. And in general, especially for folks like me that are a little bit older, and have a lot of sun damage, it really helps soften the skin and soften the look. And then I think, do you have a hair light on me? Yeah, you do. Yeah,
I
so you
do.
can see I've got a hair light on here as well. That's actually a point source. In Hollywood, they'll call that a kicker. In the sort of documentary space or TV space, I'll call it a hair light. And then there's another light source over there that's sort of a full light. And so this is like basic 3-point lighting. You don't need to have 2 giant C stands, which is what Sean's got set up over here, with a 6-foot, diffusion surface. That's kind of getting into Hollywood world. If you go and do Shane Hurlbut's course on being a DP, for example, Shane will show you that he'll set up like a 20-foot diffusion surface, this massive surface when he was shooting, I forget what the actress's name is, but, and then they'll put, big 12K lights behind that require generators and so on. As a portable filmmaker, you want to use a softbox of some kind, but you can get them, they kind of crunch up into a really small bag. And then they'll kind of poof open and you put it onto whatever your light is, and it'll give you a surface that's maybe minimum, I would say, of about that big. The bigger you can go, the better, because it's giving you a greater surface that is emitting light, and so it's giving you a softer light. Now, there's a trick that it took me a few tries to learn, but if you have a small softbox, move it closer. It has the effect of making it appear to be a really big soft source. And so that might work for you guys. But that's the difference between soft light and hard light. And if you're shooting interviews, you really want to use some kind of soft light. So Sean, I guess if you're shooting outdoors, it's best to kind of try to avoid the sun with those hard sort of noonday shadows coming from above.
If you have to shoot outside, I'll take that exact same soft grid that I have for you, and I'll flip it above the subject and soften the sunlight coming through. And what that does is that keeps them at the same exposure as the sun, and I can keep the background exposed for them as well. And so I haven't cut the light down on them so much that I have to bring back light in myself and add it. Somebody asked in the questions why we don't use ring lights.
Oh my God.
Or they asked about the stupidity. They didn't ask why we don't use them. I'll tell you why we don't use ring lights, and here's why. This is the effect you get in someone's eye.
Yeah.
Whereas opposed to a soft source like what we have on Mark or any of us, you're going to get a much more natural look. This looks like aliens to me, or vampires. Yeah. And this is really common right now when it comes to podcasts, or I'm sorry, like the shows like these streams.
Right. So this is and by the way, Sean and I we weren't born sort of knowing this stuff. We have a friend just north of here, Ken Segrin. I actually just want to give a shout out to Ken at LSI. So Ken is a gaffer, which means that he is in charge of lighting for film sets. And Ken did the lighting for Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Starship Troopers. What else, Sean? I mean, there's a ton of like films that you've heard of that he did the lighting for.
Dumb and Dumber.
Right. Yeah. So Ken runs LSI, which is a they provide lighting gear and crew, and then they also have a psych, which is kind of a curved wall space with soundproofing to film things. And Sean and I went there when we were trying to create a portable rig to do. Was it before Open, Sean, or after? Maybe after.
That was actually after. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was after. And so Ken breaks out this 12K light, which is massive, and this enormous diffusion surface and all of the like pro gear, and we're setting it up in the psych. And he's like, okay, we're going to start big, and then we're going to make this portable and work it down to a smaller size. And he trained us starting with, this is how if you have an infinite budget, how you would set it up. And then this is what you're compromising as you go smaller and smaller. And it gave us a really good sort of fundamental understanding of how to get set up. And what we ended up with is using a lighting kit called the Barry Adams, Sean? Oh my God, maybe we can post it in the show notes actually. But it's a tiny lighting rig that is battery powered. or AC powered. It comes in a small hard case that is small enough to actually take on board a plane. We've got the lights are point sources, but they have a little hole in them for an umbrella. And so what we did is we got these umbrellas and we point the light. I'm trying to stay in the shot here. We point the light at the umbrella and it bounces off this umbrella that has a sort of reflective surface that gives you kind of a soft source. And that is how we create a soft source for the folks that we're interviewing. And it's super portable because, of course, umbrellas just collapse into something that's like this long and can be put in a case. And so that tiny little case with those, I think 3 umbrellas, because it was 3 lights that we were using, give us a huge amount of flexibility in it. And it's really, really portable and super flexible. But that's kind of how our journey evolved with as far as lighting goes. Now, there's something else I want to mention, and that is color rendering index. So CRI, some of you might have heard of it. It is a measure of the quality of light as it relates to film. And I actually have a colorimeter, maybe color meter over here. And this thing is insanely expensive. Don't buy it. Just look at the CRI setting for the light that you're using. But what this will do, I'm actually going to, let me see if I can see myself in the shot over here. So I'm going to measure this guy. All right. And don't worry, I'll explain to you what's on the screen. You don't have to see it. Where'd you go? Okay, it got kind of dim, but you can see that there's a whole bunch of color bars there. And what this is showing you the quality of the light that Sean's used over here, and it's 94.3, which is quite acceptable for film. The really good lights, like the 12Ks that I mentioned, those will have a CRI of 99. Those are incandescent lights. They're extremely bright. They're very hot. They need a generator and so on. You can actually get LED lights now that have a CRI of 99. But what it's telling you is that for all of these colors, that's how the light is going to render those colors. And that orange band that you can see in the middle there, that guy is super important because that's your skin tones. Your skin is orange, even if you're not orange like I am. If you're just like a normal human, you have blood in your skin, and that does show through. And so orange and red is super important in your color spectrum. And if that bar over here is too low, you end up looking really bad. And so that's why CRI matters, is because you might get these fancy lights that you buy at your local, pro camera store, and you think they're amazing, and they've actually only got a CRI of 80 because it's just like crappy LEDs. Excuse me, I'm not allowed to swear on the show, but they've just got really bad, like cheap LEDs that they've used. And you can't understand why the skin of the people that you're either taking photos of or shooting video of looks terrible. That's what CRI is. There's a newer measure that folks are using now called TLCI. And for some reason, this thing's locked, so I'm not going to go into the TLCI menu right now. But TLCI is how well light will render on a digital sensor. And I want to say that it was developed by the BBC, but I'm going to walk that back because I'm not 100% sure of that. But TLCI is just another measure that you can use. But CRI is kind of the standard. So when you're shopping for lights, look at what their CRI is. Do not use anything with a CRI of less than 95. 80, that's your like sodium vapor lamps out in the street, and it's awful. If we turn on the warehouse lights over here, these are about 80 as well. And any one you film will look absolutely hideous. So that's what a color meter does. You don't need one of these. You can just look at the manual of your lights, but they are fun to play with, and they do a fair amount of other things. All right, I'm going to get onto audio capture, and Kathy, I'm just going to keep going here because I'm having fun. If you need to step away and grab a cup of coffee or anything like that, if any of you guys need to kind of step away and take a potty break, go for it. But if you don't mind, I'd really like to keep going because I've been wanting to do this forever, and they finally let me on the show. You see, this is why they don't let me on the show. Okay, so in terms of audio capture, Sean, I guess lav or shotgun are the two main options if you're capturing an interview's audio.
Yeah, those are going to be probably the two best options. Yeah.
Yeah. So what the pros tend to use if they're shooting film is they'll use a shotgun mic. And I'm going to find this guy over here. This is called a dead cat, and it stops wind. And if you don't use one of these and you have wind, in post-production, you will have a very sad face. because you will have a lot of wind, and you'll have to use a plugin made by a company called Isotope to remove the wind, and then you'll realize that actually it's removing some of your audio as well. So you're probably going to want to just go back and shoot the thing again. That is a shotgun mic, and it's highly directional. So if you're pointing it at someone, it sort of has a, I forget the terminology, but the area of sensitivity is in that direction. And so what they'll generally do is have a shotgun mic kind of like this, just out of the shot. And that is going to be your best source of audio. And another alternative that is really portable is a lav mic, and I don't have one with me right now, but I think you guys probably all know what those are. And you'll clip that onto your Talent's shirt. Sean, I think you introduced me to the concept of taping it using gaffer tape.
Yeah, on the inside, just to keep it from showing. Yeah, that's one of the drawbacks of, yes, not green usually, but I guess it's on the inside of the shirt, so it doesn't matter. But that's one of the drawbacks of lavaliers, is that it's always attached to your subject. So you either see it or you're worried about the noise that it makes. Also, another thing is the sound is coming from usually down here. And when you record that sound, that's not usually how humans hear other humans. That the audio from a shotgun mic is going to be much more true to the way that we actually hear the audio.
Yeah.
So the nice thing about lavaliers is if you want to, say follow somebody around for an entire day and you don't have an audio guy with a boom, the lavalier is always on them. You always get the audio.
Yeah. This is a Sennheiser, the shotgun mic is a Sennheiser MKH416P48, but I'm mentioning it because if I recall correctly, this is very much liked by a lot of audio folks, and it's been good to us. But if you see any BTS footage, behind the scenes footage of pro interviews, you'll see them putting these generally without the dead cat if they're indoors above someone. Or you'll see a mic person or a sound person operating a boom with outdoors with one of these on. Don't forget to put your dead cat on, and you can get these dead cats for lav mics as well, and they're kind of poofy. The thing that I really don't like about labs is the rustling that you get from clothes, and hair in particular for folks that have long hair. It's for some reason that's even more distracting. Isotope makes a plugin called RX8, which has a bunch of audio filters. One of them is a de-rustle filter. You can use it. It's very good, considering how desperate you are when you discover that you have rustle and you're trying to get rid of it, and it actually does get rid of it. But again, you're affecting your original source audio as well. It doesn't come without a little bit of a cost. So try to remember to put the dead cat on the mic. All right, so I mentioned this earlier, but if you're recording audio, you're going to be recording into either one of these little task cams, which I really like, or one of these bigger zooms. I actually haven't noticed a big difference between these other than this one having more channels. But I like these little guys because you can just have someone put them in your pocket. But that's what your audio is going to be going into. And if you are, these don't have phantom power, do they? Yeah, if you're using a fancier mic, that shotgun mic might require phantom power. And so you're going to have to use this guy, which does provide phantom power and has these XLR inputs. So that is actually maybe a reason to use this. It sends voltage down the line and actually power the mic. So let's see.
The ENG cameras are also nice, those bigger cameras, because they will provide phantom power to your shotgun mics.
Yep, that's right. I'm going to just bring this guy over here. There's your XLR input on your ENG. That'll provide 48 volt phantom power. There's actually a mount that'll mount your shotgun mic on top of this guy, or worst case, you can use a built-in mic over here that's on top of the camera. But we generally tend to use a shotgun mic, and with these guys, you can get a shoulder mount. In fact, this one has a shoulder mount on, and you can just kind of walk around like this, or put it on a tripod and film that way. But yeah, that's another benefit of ENG. If you get an ENG camera, it takes a week or two, but you begin to really appreciate some of the things, some of the flexibility that it gives you. And you begin to understand why you're carrying this heavy thing around, why you're paying that price, because there are some real benefits there. So as far as audio goes, like with focus in when you're shooting video, The one thing in audio that you can't fix is clipping. So if your levels are too high and your audio is clipping, there's nothing you can do about it. There's no, Isotope RX8 plugin that you can use to somehow get that data back. You have lost information. You will never get it back. So always err on the side of turning your levels too low rather than too high. Trust me on this. I've made this mistake and it's horrible.
Raymond makes a good point in the comments to record audio externally. If you have an audio guy, yes, because he can save you even if somebody starts peaking in the middle. If you set your audio and then go run your camera, who knows what you have when you get back.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So in fact, let's chat about syncing for a second. So the way that we would we would do multiple shots in an interview. So we'd have multiple cameras, one on me, one on the other person, and so on. And the way we would synchronize those shots so that they're lined up in the editing program is we'd clap, literally just like that. And then we've got a spike on the audio from all of the cameras. We line those spikes up in the editing program, and we're good. These days, Sean, what is the octopus thing that we use?
We use a thing called tentacle sync.
Right. And what that does is it actually, I'm actually totally going off script over here, by the way. But if I recall, can you describe how it works, Sean?
So with the tentacle sync units, you plug it into your computer and you can set the little unit to time of day. And what it'll do is once you have that set on your computer, you can take that out to your cameras and plug it in via the timecode jack, the audio jack, there's different ways to plug it in. But when your camera receives that audio feed, it'll switch the camera, the record time in the camera to time of day or time code. Yeah, exactly what you need.
Yeah.
You can go around, say you've got 8, 10, 20 cameras. You can go around and plug that into each of those cameras, and then they'll all be running the exact same time of day to the millisecond as you plug it in. Sometimes it fades.
Right. Yeah. So it's all coming back to me now. So what Sean's describing is something called jam syncing. And so you've got this little device and you can walk up to one of these URSAs with these ENG cameras and you can jam sync it, which means that it syncs the clock in the camera to the tentacle sync. And then you'll take it over to the next camera and you'll do the same thing. And now their time codes are perfectly synchronized. When you bring it into your editing suite, it just lines it up for you. You don't have to do the audio spike thingy that I just described, which is really awkward. Some cameras don't do jam syncing. And in that case, what you do is you just have one of those tentacles permanently plugged in to the camera, and it provides an audio signal on a separate track in addition to the audio that you're recording that encodes that embeds time code in your footage, and then you can extract that later on and convert it into time code in your editing suite. So that's the way the professionals do it, is using actual time code and using jam syncing, or you just clap and you look for that audio spike and you can kind of line it up that way. So
that's what those old clapper boards were invented for, by the way.
Right.
That's why we even had those.
That's right. It's not just like, oh my God, it's so Hollywood, they use the clapper board. No, there's a reason for it.
And we still do that with the podcast when we're recording, because what we do is we record the audio locally on both ends, and then we use StreamYard to connect, and so it records locally, or it records on StreamYard and then the two locals, and so we clap so that our audio engineer can sync all of that up as well.
Yeah, Cody, our audio engineer based in Denver, who has been very, very good to us. So for podcasting, I just wanted to mention mic stands are great because they avoid rumble. If I had a mic stand on this table right now that wasn't sort of a freestanding mic stand, and I'm being very animated and pounding the table, it's going to add rumble to the audio signal. So just keep that in mind as well. Some things that we use, and we're actually using on this show right now, we use universal audio interfaces. And Sean, do you have that still that I took of your unit? Yeah. I think it's an Arrow. Yeah, so that's what the universal audio or UA device looks like. And those little guys have what's called Shark DSP chips in them. And again, we're not making any money out of this, all right? There's no affiliate links here or anything. This is just gear that we absolutely love, and this was recommended to me by a very good friend of mine who's a sound engineer and also a bit of a rock star. He like a real rock star. But these have DSP chips in them, and UA makes software that you can put on those DSP chips that will emulate certain famous pieces of gear. And one of the really famous pieces of gear out there is a Neve 1073 preamp, which used to be used in the 70s to record bands like Fleetwood Mac. And the Neve has a certain, I almost want to say, texture to it, because it's more like a feeling than a really noticeable sound. But we use that Neve preamp emulator. We load that onto the UA device. We use a mic like a is it Electro Voice RE20, I think is maybe the one that you're using right now, Scott. That's plugged into that UA device. And the Neve adds a little bit of bassiness and a little bit of analog crunch to our podcasts and our video. And you can play with it. It doesn't have many controls, the little Neve strip when you're playing within the software. But that's just one of the things that the UA device does. You can emulate famous studios, the sort of room effect that you get from really famous studios. You can emulate guitar amps, bass amps, all kinds of stuff, and it offloads all of that processing onto the UA device with the thanks, Raymond. It emulates all of those old amplifiers and preamplifiers and so on. So I love that piece of gear, and it's been very good to us. I'm not earning anything from this or whatever, but where we buy our gear from is Sweetwater. I used to buy it at another physical store, which sucked because the people there didn't really know their stuff. There's a guy called Josh Strid at Sweetwater, who's my sales guy there, and super knowledgeable. And if he doesn't know something, he'll find someone who does, and they ship on time and so on. I friggin' love Sweetwater, and we're not earning anything from saying that. They've just been really, really good to us. And then the other mic that we use, in fact, I think it's the mic to my right over here. I don't know if you can see it in the shot. Yeah, there it is. That, I think, is a Shure SM7B, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, look at that. I got that right. With this little foam thing on it to reduce popping from people speaking. I'm actually not using this right now. You're just hearing me through my my headphones. But this is a really great podcasting microphone. I think it might need phantom power, but using this in combination with the Universal Audio, either Arrow or Apollo unit, putting a Neve preamp on there to get a little bit of that crunch and add a little bit of bassiness. If you have a tinny sounding voice like I do, you can sound more manly. But that setup is really, really nice. And onwards, just for the hell of it, let's keep going. I'm going to keep going until Kathy starts literally screaming at me. So here's some other fun stuff. This is a director's viewfinder. These guys are not super expensive, but you can actually set different focal lengths and different aspect ratios on this. This one is I can't see the brand on it, but what you can actually do is set a for example, set a Super 35 sensor, which is about the size of celluloid film, and then you can choose your focal length, and you can look through this and see what the shot looks like. And I dropped a little eye piece over here, but that is super, super helpful if you want to preview. You don't need it. It's a nice to have. This is actually something that's kind of just a curiosity. It's called gaffer's glass, and it's really, really dark glass, and it lets you look at any light and see where the point source is. So this big diffusion surface that Sean has set up over here, I can look at it through this, and I can see exactly where the light is. You can also find the sun on an overcast day. If you want to see where the shadows are going to appear once the clouds clear. And just a tip, when we shot at, I think it was WordCamp Phoenix, we shot in an atrium. It was a partly cloudy day, and the sun kept disappearing behind the clouds and then reappearing. It was a nightmare in post. So if you have a day like that, try to get to a place where you're in shadow or you're indoors, because you're going to have to constantly readjust your exposure. And when it gets too dark and you try to up the exposure, you're going to get grain. So that was one of the issues that we had to deal with on Open. That was a real pain in the butt. But yeah, it's just another tool. Let's see what else. Makeup is actually super helpful. So if you are a guy and you don't like wearing makeup, you might want to rethink that, because this is something by MAC. It's called MAC Fix. It's some kind of powder. But basically what this does is it removes reflection from your face. And so whether it's talent that you're filming or you're filming yourself, consider taking some powder. Go to Nordstrom's, go to the MAC makeup counter, talk to the guy or the gal there and say, I'm shooting in high def. I want to deal with reflections. Help me. Like, what based on my skin tone or whatever. What would you recommend? They'll hook you up, and what you do is there's a line that goes all the way down there, and that's where most of the reflections come from. You just mainly focus on that with the powder, either on your talent or on yourself, and it removes the reflections. I didn't want to put this on today. We had some reflection. I went and I put some of the stuff on, and I was like, oh my goodness, like, because it was pinging off my my big forehead, and it wasn't too much fun. So I'm gonna skip all of that. Man, we could go for a long time, but I would just say, when you're going out and shooting, don't get obsessed with your gear. Don't get distracted. Focus on the basics. Focus, in other words, camera focus. Don't mess that up. I've already told you the story about that. Your exposure level, your audio levels, make sure they're not clipping. How you're framing the shot, because you can't undo that. You can crop it, but you can't pan the camera or tilt it or anything like that. Watch out for camera shake, and a heavy tripod will help you with that. If you are shooting raw on one of these Blackmagics, you can change the ISO setting in post. Like, after you've done the shoot, you can actually change the ISO, essentially the sensor sensitivity after the fact, which is one of the amazing things about shooting in RAW. If you're not shooting in RAW, if you're shooting on one of these things, you can't do that. It's baked in. Also with white balance, you can change that in post if you're shooting in RAW with one of these guys. You can't do that on a Sony, as far as I recall. Sean, is that right? I don't think
and on that note, please set your white balance. Do not do auto white balance.
Right.
I'm okay with autofocus, but I'm not okay with auto white balance.
Yeah. So you can change white balance, which is essentially warmth or coolness, in post. The reason Sean's saying don't use auto white balance is because the camera will just change it for you. Like, the sun goes behind a cloud or something changes in the shot, and the camera's like, ooh, I'm going to just adjust it. And now what you're doing in post when you're editing your footage is you're chasing the white balance, which is not going to be much fun. Camera shake is also something that you can't get rid of in post, or you might be able to, but it's hard. And then the other thing is, I would really recommend climbing the learning curve and learning how to color grade your footage. Firstly, don't just shoot in whatever the default is on the camera, Rec 709 or whatever, and then just put that on YouTube. You can get a lot of value by actually grading your footage. There's something called a LUT, which is a lookup table. As you start learning about film and video and so on, you're going to come across these instructional videos that show you how to do color grading. And at the end, the guy's going to say, buy my LUT. Okay, and what that means is, you click on the link, go buy my LUT, pay me money. What that means is, LUT is basically just a lookup table. And it is a way to take footage that looks a certain way and transform it into looking a different way. So it might make it colder, more blue. It might warm it up. It might add contrast. It might alter the white balance, all kinds of stuff. And LUTs, the idea is that you can film one thing and then apply a LUT, and suddenly it looks like the original Technicolor look from the 1970s or whenever Technicolor was popular. And that's complete crap, because every shot is exposed differently. It has a different palette depending on what folks were wearing and so on. You have to kind of hand grade those, and it's not hard to hand grade footage. So I think we're already 43 minutes over, but what the hell? Let's dive into DaVinci Resolve right now and talk you through that a little bitty. So I'm going to try to share my screen here. See if I can do that. Click share screen and application window and DaVinci Resolve. All right, Sean, have you got my screen up on the thing?
I do.
Excellent. All right, this, ladies and gentlemen, will change your life. And I'm not kidding. DaVinci Resolve is absolutely amazing. So Resolve is made by Blackmagic, the same guys who make the Blackmagic, the little Blackmagic camera that I've been showing you on this show, as well as the Ursa. And they're based in Australia, and they make really good gear. Now, Resolve has the entire post-production workflow from media management, which is the tab you're looking at right now, to 2 different ways of editing. That's a very fast way of editing. It's called Cut. And then you've got a more traditional editing workflow here. Resolve also has Fusion, which provides visual effects. And I'm not going to dive into Fusion, and I'm going to walk you through the other stuff, but Fusion is a little bit beyond the scope of what we're doing today. And then this is where the real magic happens. This is where you do color grading in DaVinci Resolve. Then it has Fairlight for audio with an infinite number of channels. This is actually comparable to Pro Tools, and I'm sure you Pro Tools guys out there are going to want to kill me for saying that, but it really, really is. Fairlight is amazing. And then it's got the export stage over here where you can choose how you want to export. I'm going to walk you through some of the stuff, but the basic workflow in post-production is ingesting your media. So you've got your media management here. This is actually just some footage from Warren Eagle's course on color grading. Warren Eagles is a very well-known colorist in film. He has some courses that he provides. Sean and I have both been on one of his courses, and it was excellent. This is just some sample footage that Warren had on the course where he was getting us to, for example, take this shot and fix it because it was incredibly blue. What I've done is I've just dragged one of the shots into the media management area over here. You can create bins, you can add metadata. So just to kind of show you the capabilities here, if I click on this piece of footage right there, and if you look on the right, you can see all of the metadata that I can add. Sometimes some cameras can add this automatically. So for example, scene and take, you can actually program that into the Ursa, I think, and it will just capture that automatically. You can add your own metadata, so you can have an assistant go in and add all of this stuff: episode name, location, unit name, setup, camera ID. It just goes on, and you can search on all of this. And so it's even got like colorist assistant for this particular shot. So it gives you a lot of capabilities. And the reason this is important is because if you get into this, if you get into a YouTube, create a YouTube channel, as Kathy was saying, you want to create media regularly. Maybe you're flying around the country, maybe you're driving around the country, you're shooting a lot of media. All of that stuff is valuable. You've put in a lot of time and effort. You've bought the gear, you've traveled, and so on. The folks that you're interviewing, who've given you their time. You might not ever have any of that time again. You want to take that precious footage and put it somewhere where you can find it again. And that is why it's important to categorize this stuff. Add the metadata, take the time to do it, or pay someone to do it if you need to. Put your footage in bins, organize it, because if you don't and you get into post, it's a nightmare to track that stuff down, right, Sean?
Yeah, yes, it is. And there's nothing worse than losing just a single shot that you really, really need. So.
Right. That one shot that you now can't find, so this allows you to do media management. I'm going to move on to the next thing because I don't want to take up too much of your time. This is where you're editing, and Resolve's editing workflow is amazing. If you're coming over from Premiere, which I strongly recommend you do, because, and this is, I can't believe I actually haven't mentioned this, Resolve is free. Resolve is completely free. There is a paid version, but all you get with that is some additional visual effects. The free version is fully functional. All right, you can do everything that I'm showing you here. You can do in the free version. You also have the complete Fusion for visual effects and color and Fairlight. It's all there. So download it and immediately start trying it. It is Blackmagic is competing aggressively with Adobe. Adobe's licenses have gotten incredibly expensive. They went over from a single purchase model to a pay-as-you-go model, which actually turns out it's much more expensive. And if you're a filmmaker, you're always in some kind of budget crunch. So coming over to Resolve really reduces your costs, but it gives you capability that you wouldn't believe. So just to talk a bit more about that, this is the color. This is where you actually do color in film. And DaVinci Resolve used to only do color. That was their thing, and it used to cost $150,000. A bunch of people would come around and install like a mainframe computer in your basement, and you It was a lot. Blackmagic bought Resolve and improved it and then made it free. And so what you're getting now is what used to cost six figures in the sort of early 2000s, or maybe it was the 90s. And you have all this capability now that Hollywood would have killed for back then, and you've got it completely free. Okay, so what I'm going to do is take a little bit of time here and just walk you through how color works. And the beautiful thing about this is it's a node structure. So I've got a node over here. I'm going to call it contrast. Whoopsie, let me create that node again. I accidentally deleted it. I'm going to call it contrast. And I'm going to go in, and on this shot, I'm going to just adjust the contrast a little bit. You can see my scopes on the bottom right are changing. As I reduce contrast, you can see that they kind of crunch. And as I increase contrast, you can see they spread out. And then you can adjust your pivot, which is sort of the central area around which your contrast is revolving. And then what you can do is go on to the next step and adjust, for example, your saturation. So we'll say sat for saturation, and I'll go in there and I can, for example, make this completely black and white if I want to, or just give it more of a filmic feel like that. And so I go. So it's a very logical structure. You have tremendous flexibility. Just for the heck of it, I'm going to add an actual grade to this. I'm going to call this grade. And Sean, what grade am I about to add?
Let me guess. If I had to guess, I'm going to go with a teal orange grade.
Oh my goodness, you're so right. So this is the most cliched grade in the whole industry, but I'm going to drag my shadows down to teal, and I'm going to go, so if I go all the way, you can see it gets really teal. You want to do very small movements here, but I'll just add a little bit of teal to those shadows, and I'll warm up the midtones. Actually, that's like too much teal, but anyway, and then I'll warm up the highlights over there and make that a little bit orange outside. And that actually looks pretty awful because I'm rushed right now. I'm just going to reduce the amount of teal there. But you get the idea.
Learn to use the scopes, and he's 100% right. Yeah, you got to read those.
That is exactly
scopes.
Right. Yes, sir.
In post
Thank you very much.
and in camera, very helpful. Yeah.
Yep. And as you can see, if you look at my scopes, I'm actually clipping in the reds on the top and on the bottom. So what I might do is go back to my contrast node and just reduce the contrast a little bit to bring those back into range. But you can see I'm actually losing a lot of the image is beginning to look pretty bad. So anyway, that's one of the things that the scopes will tell you right there. All right, so this tool, again, is totally free. And this part of the workflow, when you're making content for YouTube, is usually not done because people just simply don't know about it. They don't know about this step in the process of production. So this can give you a real competitive advantage at zero cost. And you can do this with any camera. You don't need a Blackmagic camera to have captured the footage to be able to do this kind of color grading. You can use a Sony, you can use your iPhone, whatever you want. If you're using S-Log, it gives you a little, or some sort of log footage, it's going to give you a little bit more dynamic range. If you're using RAW, as in Blackmagic RAW, it gives you a lot of latitude. So, you know, those are the choices that you've got. Fairlight is where you can do your audio. This is full featured, incredibly powerful, and you've got all your audio effects here on the right. Can you guys see this on the screen over here, Sean, on the far right?
Yeah, I can see, yeah.
Okay, cool. So you've got noise reduction, and if I go down to my VST plugins, this is fully compatible with VST and AU plugins, if you're familiar with those. And there's the commercial plugins that I have to de-click, de-crackle, de-S, de-hum, de-plosive, de-reverb, and denoise, and that's just like some of the stuff. You've got EQ, dynamics, compression, all that stuff is over here, and you've essentially got an infinite number of digital channels that you can play with. And if you add that universal audio device, all of those plugins will appear here as well, and give you all of that capability to emulate sort of real-world analog gear, analog studios, and so on. And then you've got your final export phase over here, where you can choose your container, QuickTime or MP4. If you're sending this to Twitter, you're going to choose MP4 because it's the only thing that Twitter will take. And then you can pick what your compression or uncompressed codec will be. So either H.264 or 265 if you want compressed. I would use H.264 if it's for Twitter, for example, or any other social media platform. And then you've also got ProRes if you're sending this to another studio, for example. like a VFX shop. And then you've also got, if you're making a film, you've got DCP, Digital Cinema Package, which is how theaters want to receive their films. So it gives you everything from the sort of social media, side of things to actual filmmaking for theaters. And then of course your resolution, etc. And you hit export, and you're done. And that is my incredibly fast introduction to DaVinci Resolve for folks that don't yet know about it. I strongly suggest that you get this and play with it. And if you're using Adobe right now, come over from Adobe Premiere. Color grading in Adobe Premiere is something that Sean loves to do, but that's because he's a masochist.
It's not true. Somebody mentioned on here using a color calibrated monitor for color grading.
Yes, thank you.
We actually have a funny story when it comes to Open and how we graded that. We had a color calibrated monitor. I have a Flanders Scientific CM171, and we would grade the majority of the film on that, but then to check ourselves, knowing that not everybody was going to watch it on my color calibrated monitor, we would throw it on a very large TV in the basement, and we put it on the football setting, which had a very green look to it. And we would grade the film. It was terrible. We would grade the film on the color calibrated monitor, and then we would take it over to the other screen that looked horrible, and we'd say, okay, is this actually viewable on most consumer televisions?
On the most awful screen that we could find, with the most awful setting.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, when it comes to color calibration, it's very good to have a color calibrated monitor. It's another thing to know, and you guys will all notice from the last scene of Game of Thrones, it's one thing to calibrate and color grade on a good monitor. It's another thing to have something that other people can actually utilize and watch, because they're not going to have a $5,000 monitor sitting there.
Right, yeah. So just to expand on my hate for the last season of Game of Thrones, the issue there was it was really dark, and when they were looking at the uncompressed footage on this gorgeous, bright 1000-nit monitor, it would have looked amazing. Once they applied a compression algorithm to it, H.265 or whatever the heck Netflix uses, or HBO, whatever, it took those darks, those shadows where you would have had detail, and it just turned them into blocks that looked like Lego. And it was so hideous, and it was an absolute disaster. And I think the DP or the director said, "Oh no, it was totally intentional." I'm like, yeah, right. So if you want to color,
yeah.
Go ahead, Sean. Sorry.
I was gonna say, and so was the volume on Tenet. So.
Oh. Yeah, right. Totally intentional, but not really.
Right.
So this will actually calibrate your monitor for you. This is a X-Rite i1. It's not super expensive. You put it on your screen, and it'll take your screen through a bunch of flashes and colors and stuff like that, and it'll create a hardware option for you in Mac, for example, that will let you. It'll calibrate your monitor. So what you're looking at is then calibrated once you enable that setting. Guys, we've been going for a long time, and you should probably just shut me down at this point. But let me see what else I got here.
I was going to say, you got a good 3 minutes still, at least.
Okay, all right. So the one thing, and I started off by saying this, that the gear doesn't matter as much as your content. So let's talk about storytelling for a minute. And what I'm going to tell you, you might. This is hard to find. I had to go through a little bit of a journey to discover this. Whether you're doing commercials or documentary or scripted film, having an understanding of story is incredibly helpful. Even if you're just marketing, your brand has a story attached to it. And understanding the nature of story is super powerful. It's a real enabler. If you dive into screenwriting, you're going to hear about a book called Save the Cat. You're going to read it. It's written by Blake Snyder. And you're going to be like, oh, yeah, I totally understand screenwriting. Then what you're going to do is go a little deeper and discover a book called Story by McKee, and realize that there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more to the structure of story and so on if you're doing scripted film, for example. And then you'll get to the good stuff. And the good stuff is a guy called Joseph Campbell, who was a friend of mine who's a producer at Fox told me about Joe Campbell's book, Hero with a Thousand Faces. And that was written in 1949. Joe was he studied theology and mythology. And most folks who study that will go into a career where they're asking the question, why are we here? But what Joe did is he asked, why do we tell the stories that we tell the way we tell them? Why is mythology throughout the ages why does it all have a common structure? And he went really deep on that over a period of years, and he wrote a book that's fairly deep and a little wordy called Hero with a Thousand Faces, where he unpacks mythology from all the major religions, other sources, fairy tales, Greek mythology, Roman, Viking, just everything, and identified that all of this stuff has a common structure. Campbell's book, Here with a Thousand Faces, is it's a bit of an intense read. And so in the 1990s, this guy called Chris Vogler was working as an executive producer for Disney. And Vogler wrote a 7-page memo, where he unpacked Campbell's work. And I think he may have also mentioned that George Lucas used Joseph Campbell's work as the basis for Star Wars, and other major writers of major films have used Campbell's story arcs. Lucas said that if he hadn't discovered Campbell's work, he'd still be writing Star Wars. And so Vogler wrote a 7-page memo that really distilled some of the basic elements of Campbell's mythological structure, including archetypes and story arc. And this memo went viral in Disney in the 90s, and a lot of the writers, including just cartoon writers, everything, started using these concepts. And it's once you read this stuff, you'll be like, oh yeah, like every fairy tale I've ever read has this structure. It became really popular. Other studios started asking for the memo, and so Vogler decided to write a book called The Writer's Journey, that essentially just unpacks that memo a little bit and gives you the essential elements that you need to understand story. So I would really recommend that if you're into storytelling, whether it's documentary, filmmaking, building a brand, you can do a lot worse than reading Vogler's work. If you're interested in Campbell's work, you can read Hero with a Thousand Faces. Campbell actually did a series of PBS interviews in the 90s, right before he died, talking about mythology. It tends to get a bit into the theology area, but it's still worth watching. It's very good. And so that concludes my spiel. Kathy, you can now kick me off and get on with our regularly scheduled programming.
This was a very deep dive on a lot of tech that really ups the game in terms of video production. I suspect we're going to get a lot of people diving in later, looking at specific items, but we've created content. And this is for you, the WordPress user, to really up your game and the types of content that you're creating that reaches your customers, the stories that you tell, how the production comes together. All of that is incredibly important. And we're here not only to help you secure that, but we're here to help you tell better stories. So we're actually planning additional content in the WordPress space that is going to help you do even more of that, because we feel like it's important not just to help you protect your site, but to help make your site something worth protecting. So I think this was a good venture deep into the realms of all of the gear that we have in video land. I've been just impressed I've been exposed to this over the past couple of years and learned a lot. And I hope that this fast-paced dive into this was helpful to all of you. We have some swag winners though, Scott, don't we?
Yes, we do. And I believe we have a graphic with the winners here. We had Brandon win, Thomas, Rick, Diego, and Andrew. Congratulations to you 5. You You've been around, you know what Open is. And Open, as Sean would tell you, is a documentary short that was launched in 2019 at WordCamp US during the State of the Word keynote. Sean, that you did a ton of work on that. You had mentioned earlier, and I wanted to ask you, we talked about perfecting a video and how obsessive it can be. When you were working on this, how often did you find yourself, locked into a room and, just working super late and not letting go until, pretty much falling asleep? Did you get really obsessed with it?
Once I found that story that we talked about earlier, that second iteration, once I found the story, it's one of those things. It's like you said, you go to sleep as late as possible, and the second you wake up, you can't wait to get back to it because you know where it needs to go. And that's what happened here. I think it was only like 2 weeks after that second iteration, but yeah,
you remember that,
really,
Kathy?
Totally. Yeah, it was amazing.
When we saw iterations on Open that just didn't resonate with us at all. And then we looked at, Sean spent this, he just like disappeared for a weekend and came back. I think maybe it was Tuesday when he like reemerged. And Kathy and I took a look at the edit and we went, oh my goodness, we have a film. And it needed polish, it needed everything, but it had that basic arc. Right. There was a film and it was clear we just needed to finish it. And the rest was downhill. Sean had nailed it. So.
Well, as always, Mark, thank you for joining us on the show. Sean as well. Kathy, this is going to be one that I'm going to go back and get a lot of valuable information from this with the gear that we talked about and the equipment. Really, really cool. If you have not seen it yet, head over to open.film. We talked about it a good bit today, and check that out. It is a short. Get on the mailing list. We're going to be joined by Ram. Ram will be back next week. And I'm sure we'll hear some news from him. So get onto the mailing list so you can hear it first there. Anything that him and Chloe and the rest of the Threat Intel team find. You can also subscribe to the podcast mailing list in the footer of the wordfence.com homepage. And you'll hear Ram and Kathy there. And we typically get that out every Friday. So keep an eye out for that. I don't think we're forgetting anything, Kathy, right?
I think that's it. I get to go listen to this all again and take more notes.
They're not going to have me back again because I went over by an hour and 6 minutes. So remember, the best camera is the one you have with you. Grab your iPhone or your Android, start filming, get DaVinci Resolve. It's totally free. Bring the footage in, play with it, and that's all I got.
There's our recap, Sean, for the show today. Until next week, we will be back Tuesday. Thank you for joining us on the 1-year anniversary of Wordfence Live. We've had a heck of a time here. We've really enjoyed it, and we're really happy that everybody's tuned in and stuck with us. So we appreciate it. And from all of us here at Wordfence, we hope you have a good rest of the week and a good day, and we will see you next week on Tuesday. Thanks again. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks.
Wordfence. We have better hackers.